I have been very fortunate to be close to two of South Africa's greatest sons, Mandela, whom I talked about last time, but he was like a father to me in more ways than one. And I learned a lot from him. But the important thing is, for all of us to succeed, we need someone who believes in you and can support you to the hilt. I had the good fortune, whilst Mandela was still lingering or sleeping around in Robben Island and later in Portsmouth prison, to have Desmond Tutu, who was introduced to us as an Anglican priest, bishop, and general of the South African Council of Churches during the most horrific time of our lives as a country. He became the prophetic voice. But he will be the first to acknowledge that when he got into contact with these great unwashed Black consciousness activists, his eyes were opened to the importance of psychological liberation, which as an Anglican priest who was brought up by the community of resurrection, had really bought into the spiritual world and the belief that the power of truth and love can transcend everything. Yes, it does. But there is work that needs to be done to accompany that, to effect psychological and spiritual liberation, to set the genius in each and every one of us free. And so Desmond Tutu, with his spiritual background, embraced this psychological liberation and became our supporter and advocate. And of course, when freedom came in 1994, he became the champion of reconciliation through truth-telling, and got us all to understand that there is no freedom without justice, and there is no justice without truth-telling and reconciliation. I'm very fortunate to be one of 3 advisors to Desmond Tutu and their legacy. He's now 89. He'll be exactly 89 in October. Deeply spiritual and very close to the Dalai Lama, although now he is really on the way, as he says, he's in the departure lounge. His passion is justice, and he sees education as the pathway. As Anitra quoted him saying that even during this COVID time, we really need to be thinking about those who are being excluded. But I'm mindful of those of you. We have a neuroscientist who's now in the art world, and we've got other people in the medical sciences in this conversation. What my continent suffers from so badly is our failure to follow through after political liberation with the liberation of people's humiliated and traumatized minds and souls. This is the enabler. This is the ultimate freedom. That psychological, that neurological balancing. And neuroscientists know that if you do not deal with that trauma, that humiliation, it's very difficult to move on. The great news tonight is that my relationship with John Gilmore, who found his own path, but our paths came together because he realized that the healing that's needed in South Africa and in most post-colonial, including in America, this unfinished business, is acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that the systems that oppressed the majority in the case of South Africa and the minority in the case of the US in terms of when you look at the number of people who are now African Americans. But if you look at the history, it's still the majority because indigenous Americans were also affected. That the acknowledgement of that history, that and the impact of that legacy is necessary not for retribution, but for freeing both those who benefited from the privileges of that system and those who were undermined, who were humiliated, who were traumatized by the deprivation, the dehumanization of that system. For us to be whole as a human race, we need to have that healing. And that healing can start at any time, but is absolutely critical for young people whose minds need to be and souls need to be liberated so that they can have the full benefits of emotional and cognitive development. And this is the story we are bringing to you tonight. And we are bringing you a story that is 16 years old, but a story that is sparking hope across South Africa. I had a webinar 2 days ago where people were absolutely riveted by the story. And we have people beyond that who are interested in the story. What we want you to do tonight is to accompany us to consolidate the base that is like that healing place, that place that people can come to the inspiration for this unfinished business to be completed. And not just completed with a 50% pass, but completed as a story of excellence. And this is how I'm introducing you to John Gilmore, a man who's walked a journey like no other, a man who is courageous, but completely self-giving, and whose determination is what has led to the success of the story we are going to share with you tonight. John?
Thank you, Mamphela. What a privilege it is to be talking to you as a group and to be talking with my friend, colleague, mentor, sister, Mamphela as well. So thank you for that introduction. And thank you, Anitra, for your setup of this evening and for positioning it so clearly in the context of the global reality. I'm going to share my screen and just show you a few slides that will help us to tell the story. And I ask that you just follow us in the story to get a clear picture, of what it is that we are sharing. So we're talking about breaking the cycle of African poverty. Actually, I think I've just got the wrong, I'm going to just stop there for a moment. I've got the wrong picture up. Just get to the right one. Right. There we go. So we want to share with you the story of how South African children's lives are being changed. We have a real problem in Africa, and it is that we are trapped in endless cycles of oppression and poverty. And enough has been said about Desmond Tutu's positioning of the COVID-19 response. But I want to take us back to our founding father Mandela's words about poverty not being an accident. Like slavery and apartheid, poverty is man-made and needs to be removed by the actions of human beings. And what COVID-19 has shown us is that this poverty is going to get further entrenched unless there are significant interventions. The gap between rich and poor has never been wider. The digital divide is part of that gap. And unemployment and poor access or access to very limited health facilities is a consequence. And of course, in an organization like ours, which depends entirely on people to make contributions to support us, we've had to take some of that knock as well. Now, Steve Biko, this quote probably sums up the essence of the work of LEAP, because it's built on this reality that the most powerful weapon in the hands of the oppressed is the mind of the oppressed. And as Mamphela indicated, the internalized inferiority, that sense of not being good enough, which was built into the structure of formal education and built into the institutions of the country, have left people, even though we said, and Tom, when he checked in, said he could see the difference in South Africa. Of course, there's a difference, but the apartheid is not over. The apartheid is now the apartheid of the minds of both the oppressed and the oppressor. And as a white South African, I represent a history of oppression and need also to heal myself and to free myself from the pain of being that oppressor. So Mamphela had, in her introduction, referenced the fact that political liberation does not constitute emotional or economic settlement. And just as poverty is not an accident, improving education that was consciously engineered to suppress and oppress is not going to change by accident. It has to change by design in order to reestablish the dream of 1994 that we all celebrated and embraced, hopefully and optimistically, as the transition of power took place. To remind you, prior to 1994, Black children in South Africa were prohibited by apartheid law from studying maths and science. Now that was 4 or 5 decades of legislation that made it impossible for young people who were born Black to actually study the maths and science that we're talking about, that has brought most of us into this room today. So we still sit in 2020 with the same issues. And we sit with those issues because we still sit with the legacy of colonial intervention in Africa. And the colonial pattern of education was very much a pattern of filling the head of children and ignoring the heart. And this has resulted in children being driven out of the system. And there are more than 94 million African children and youth who, as we speak, are not at school because they're not at school at all, not because of COVID-19. So where are we? We're in a society that is not healed. We live with an economic and educational reality that's almost unchanged. And even as recently as last year, could be declared by Time magazine as the world's most unequal country. The country in which the Gini coefficient is at its most extreme. The context in which we have done our work is the context of the broken spaces of South African urban landscapes and rural landscapes. It is our belief that every child, regardless of context, can and will succeed and will do well in maths and science, the great dividers in terms of apartheid education, and will go on to be successful global citizens. So we seek to prove that over the last 16, 17 years, to build big futures in broken spaces, and not to allow the spatial reality to define the future of our children. To do this, we have developed, as the various introductions have indicated, around the theme of consciousness development, the idea of becoming fully aware. If our goal in life is to become fully human, we have to develop a consciousness that takes us past just the capacity to remember and takes us to the deeper capacity to understand. And it is our view that consciousness develops through intentional emotional process rather than simply the accumulation of knowledge. Schools in the 21st century across the world, but specifically in Africa, are using outdated education systems designed really for the needs of the Industrial Revolution. And so we bring our focus through LEAP back to the African humanity of Ubuntu, and we put values at the center of our teaching and learning. The methodology is revolutionary because we flatten the hierarchy. We take power out of education. We take fear out of education. We've established 6 small schools in 6 different areas of South Africa, all in communities that could be called economically marginalized and historically ignored. And we have, in that cohort of 1,600 children, we have 65% of our children are young girls, and over 65% of our educators are young women. And we have an average age of teacher that is below 30. And this is not by accident, it's by design. We are urging the beginning of a new social movement for change. The focus of our consciousness instruction is simple, but complex. The simplicity is that it comes down to difficult conversations on a daily basis, working in circles of healing. Now, while that's a simple concept, it's a complex process, and a process that requires patience, and a process that requires the activation of the peer voice, and activation of good learning support, the ability for peers to reflect and to assess together. And at the same time, to draw our students forward to action-based social development responsibilities. So from the minute a child enters LEAP, they are committed to being part of a social development project in their own communities. So if we're calling this process a personal liberation process, a self-liberating pedagogy, we look around and we don't see terribly many young role models for this process to build around. We have to create those role models. And we have to allow our children to become the pioneers of the social movement to which I've referred. So what actually happens is that we work hard in those circles. We work hard in the conversations, the difficult conversations, the honest conversations, to enable children to break through, to develop an insight on self, where they suddenly understand that they are not victims of a context, they in fact have choice. And while they have no control over of what created the context, they have control over how they manage themselves in that context. And that same logic applies when they get to a mathematics classroom and they realize that they don't have the full understanding. They can actually transfer that insight to say, but I have choices. I can choose to become the master of this learning process. So our work is to enable the African child to leap from the fixed mindset of survival to the growth mindset that is driven by the idea of the genius within. I'm going to ask you just to listen very carefully to the young woman, Mamphela Ramphele, who is in grade 8 in one of our schools.
Hi, I'm Letabo. I'm going to tell you about what LEAP means to me right now. LEAP means a lot of things to me right now. Learning, having good education, being organized, respectful, responsible, friendly, polite, and well-mannered. LEAP means an external motivation. All teachers, staff, and learners are more understanding and sincere towards your feelings opposed to a public school. LEAP my school, my home. A school where I learn enough worthwhile things to make a strong start in life. A home where a foundation is laid that supports later education. A place where I find my desire to learn more, think of myself to find strength, nourishment, and joy in learning. I quote, education is the key to unlocking the world, a passport to freedom. Without education, you can never see the true identity of the world and its beauty.
This was one of the contributing videos from a competition which we sent out to all our students when we were in complete lockdown, saying, make a little 1-minute video and share with us what your school means to you. But when we look at the success of the school over the 16 years, you'll be able to see very quickly that LEAP has outperformed the public school sector significantly. And the most important line there is that LEAP's not only allowing people to pass, but in fact, the important thing is to break the cycle and enable them to have access to university. 72% of all the children who have been at LEAP have been able to apply to go to university or to into tertiary study of some kind. Now that's measured against the average in the communities that we serve of 5%. So you can see that the consciousness thrust is the key divide here between the success of LEAP and the lack of success in the public school sector. Our graduates have gone on to use the maths and science base to find access to fields of study and to graduate and to become economic contributors and global citizens in the field of commerce, engineering, science, information technology. And we're also very proud of the 12% of our students who've gone on to become teachers. I want one of our graduates to speak to you so that you can hear her story in a 30-second narrative.
I was born and bred in Eastern Cape in a Xhosa environment. When I was 8, my grandmother passed away, so I moved to Cape Town to stay with my mom here. In my family, I think I'm the first one to matriculate. It's hard work. That's one of the values that I learned from LEAP. You hard work and never give up. I never even thought that I was going to do my honors and masters. And then you're in honors and you say, no, man, why not? Why did I not go further? But I think a job first before a PhD.
So as you can hear from Kondisa, education is the key to the future for African children, but not the education of compliance, not the education of defeat and of meek acceptance, but the education of self-liberation, self-reliance, and self-motivation, and the education, of course, of values, so that we can develop global citizens who will speak truth to power in the next 2 centuries. We believe that it's important to take our children and their families back to the land, and wherever possible, we do that formally through farms or market gardens, including in one of our schools, a focus in the rural area of Limpopo on agricultural science, and of course, linking it directly to the needs of the community. I said earlier, every one of our children gets involved in a social development project. Here you see 2 of our students involved in their social responsibility part of their curriculum. And each child is then involved in this action-based community development.
We don't want our students to be left behind in the 21st century. If they enjoy doing coding, if they enjoy doing robotics, obviously it's going to create that thinking where they want to be engineers and obviously creating a career path for themselves.
What I've learned about technology and how to use it is going to help me a lot in university. Now I know how to use a computer, how to use the internet. So I think LEAP, in a way, unlocked my mind.
I just want to repeat that. LEAP in a way unlocked my mind. Should that not be the goal of all education, to unlock the mind? And unlocking the mind also means unlocking the behavior. And so we work very hard too at the thematic elements of the regeneration themes of climate change and creating access to quality water. So all of our children are involved in some way in experiential action-based education that will also involve planting, regenerative ecosystems. In this particular plant is an endemic plant that is able to sequester carbon at a significantly rapid rate and at a rate unparalleled, actually. And so the amazing speckworm is part of what we are teaching our children to embrace and to be part of regeneration. And in the honor of a great African, Wangari Maathai, Nobel Peace Prize winner, it's the little things that citizens do. That's what will make the difference. And so we take that into water quality, which is obviously a huge problem in the communities that we serve. And we look to do water monitoring and get all of our students equipped to be water monitors so that we can actually have an impact on the advocacy for better water and better quality water, but also the actual outcome of improving existing health conditions. Now, we're very fortunate that Barry Hughes was able to take our results and to take our work and to put them into the International Futures Model version 7.25 to see what the impact would be if South Africa incorporated the LEAP intervention more holistically throughout the country. And you can see very quickly that the retention rate of a LEAP school would result in the upper secondary education completion rate coming very close to 100% by the year 2030. And equally, the implementation of LEAP methodology across the country would also increase the years of formal tertiary education attainment significantly. You can see even as early as 2030 by almost two years. So we're really reaching out to as many people as possible to say, join and build this legacy with us. We ask that the people we speak to consider becoming a LEAP ambassador to just help us to overcome the short-term threats to our existence, because we're in a fragile period of international history, to help us to scale the solution, to take this unique methodology to tipping point in Africa, to help us to unlock the potential of the next level of leadership that could work with climate change and issues of global sustainability. And of course, we invite people to become part then themselves as global citizens and global leaders to work to close this poverty divide in the global village. We have a winning model. It is under short-term financial threat, and that's despite the fact that we're able to produce graduates from school at a cost of less than what the public school is spending for every child that passes. So if you take the failure rate into account, the state spends $3,600 for each grade 12 pass, whereas we're spending $2,300. Just to give you a benchmark of what costs are in South Africa, the average LEAP teacher cost would be $17,500 per annum. I have already referenced this, but COVID-19 has shown that connectivity is no longer a privilege. It needs to be considered a basic human right. And so at LEAP, we've embraced that. It is true that the children of LEAP have had limited access to IT devices. We do have only our grade 12s back at school full-time at the moment, and probably for the rest of the year, there will be a rotation of students coming in and out. That will mean that our students will continue to have to learn off campus, and that our teachers will be teaching online for most of the rest of the year. So it is our contention that a cell phone in the hand of every child with some access to data is a cost-effective, high-impact solution. And we embarked on that drive 4 months ago, and I'm pleased to say we managed to raise funding for 400 children to have been gifted access. The cost of that access is at about $120 per gadget with Wi-Fi access, but we're still in a position where we need another 600 cell phones to complete our experiment of self-liberation through access. Coronavirus has also created some unintended consequences in terms of costs where there is no government subsidy. And these costs relate to things like the health support funding to provide quarantine options, COVID-19 safety costs. And then, of course, we've also estimated that the pandemic has cost us in the form of lost income because of people not being able to support as they'd intended, to the tune of $106 per child. So we go back to Nelson Mandela, who said it's in our hands to create a better world for all who live in it. And we ask ourselves, what's the potential impact of sharing LEAP methodology in other sub-Saharan contexts, because we can't sit on a good idea. And we believe that we can do this through the creation of a LEAP Sub-Saharan African Institute for Educational Sustainability, where our focus will be on redefining in Africa, reimagining and redefining in Africa for the future, and start a new phase in Africa. But it starts with the philosophy of self-liberation, which will happen through consciousness shift, through shifting to innovative teaching and learning methodologies, and to opening the career pathways for children, and of course, to share as much as possible. This will take more specific forms, as you can see, in the form of the life orientation training that we do, the focus on African history, putting it back into its full perspective, the human rights focus that we are unlocking, the activation of children and women's voices, and in creating inclusivity in our society where transformation of leadership is critical as well. And our focus then on African health services to create a career center, which will open up career pathways into the health profession. And this will be done through digital integration, which I've just referred to, through focusing on maths and science specifically as social justice subjects, and to drive the child at the center of a values-driven teaching and learning framework. So I love this quote by Desmond Tutu: we need to stop just pulling people out of the river. We need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in. This is the work of LEAP. We ask everyone to come upstream with us and to amplify Desmond Tutu's vision for reconciliation and for peace in Africa and the global village. When any support you offer for LEAP gives you a bundle of simultaneously empowering and enabling possibilities. The bundle includes the social justice of supporting children's transformation into a new education framework, enabling scale to happen, supporting the sustainability issues of climate change, and obviously through this process, increasing global stability as the stability in Africa begins to reduce migration and international conflict. To discuss any of these, obviously that's why we're introducing ourselves tonight, although you all know Anitra. My contact details are easy to get hold of. And we're really asking people to support us directly if they can, represent our work in whatever forums they're operating in, introduce us to potential supporters, agree to just receive and share our information, essentially to connect, create, and collaborate. Anitra has ensured that we are able to provide a 501c3 benefit through the GCEF site, which is now fully established with a LEAP page and with a giving process through PayPal on that site with gcef.org. We also have established, as a consequence of a previous meeting, a GoFundMe site, which focuses specifically on the call to action around the COVID-19 needs for cell phones and allows our children to actually take charge of their own learning. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity to have been able to share the story with you. And I look forward to some questions and some comments and some conversation. Thank you very much, Anitra.